The member for Gippsland East.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. It's good to have a person in the chair who gets my electorate right straight off the top. Excellent. Well done. It's a pleasure to rise and make my contribution to the Appropriation Bill 2022-23. And, Acting Speaker, it's interesting, having been through this process a few times in relation to the budgets, we come in here and we go through, I guess, the standard process of people on that side standing up and saying how fantastic the budget is, and people on this side standing up and pointing out what they believe to be the flaws and the bad points of the budget. And in my contribution, Acting Speaker, I'm not probably going to change that too much, that precedent. But what I want to do in my contribution is talk about the budget from a regional perspective, a rural perspective, and outline the figures that are in the government's own budget papers in black and white to support my explanation that it is not a great budget. And the member for Hawthorn just spoke, and I agree with the comment from the member for Hawthorn that budgets are generally about cuts in some areas, additions in some areas, new initiatives in some areas, and the removal of initiatives in some areas. The problem that I certainly have, and other members on this side, particularly from areas of rural and regional Victoria, we are critical of those areas where cuts have occurred in programs and departments that are important to our local economies, are important to our way of life, and are important to our communities that we represent. And I'll start off at the top by mentioning the $47 million cut in the Department of Agriculture. Now, that is an area where we know, and it's long been said in this chamber, that when country Victoria is doing well, the whole state is doing well. But to have that level of cut when we're coming off the back, in my area, of a significant drought, and then fires that impacted very much a lot of our rural sector, as you're certainly well aware, Acting Speaker, to have that cut is very significant to AgVic. And we now have this anomaly, and I think other members in the chamber, and it might have even been the member for Murray Plains, mentioned that we now nearly have as many staff in the Premier's office as we have in the AgVic office. I mean, goodness gracious me. Goodness gracious me. Well, Minister, you might like to explain the $47 million cut in your department, because I heard you try and explain it on the Warwick Long program. I don't listen to the ABC very much, but I did tune into the Country Hour on occasion, and I heard that interview, and it was a train wreck. It was a train wreck. Where the minister was asked to explain the $47 million cut to the department, and it just didn't go well at all. It did not go well at all. But as our economy recovers post-COVID, we need to look after those areas of rural and regional Victoria that need support. And I noted the member for Buninyong in her speech said it's unfair to compare this year's budget figures to the budget figures of last year because they were inflated to deal with the response to the pandemic. And then I do agree with the member for Buninyong in some of those cases that we have inflated figures from last year to deal with COVID, but there are some areas that I'll point out where we go back 2 years. We have the road asset management budget cut. We have the transport infrastructure budget cut, a combined of $100 million cut, when our roads are in a state of disrepair in Victoria, an absolute state of disrepair in Victoria. How is it that we have temporary road signs put up warning of dangers and risks on our roads, temporary signs that are there for 8 months at a time? They're semi-permanent, as the member for Lowen points out. They are there for 8 months at a time. We've had the regional development budget cut, $87 million, or 31.2%, but a 68% cut over the past 2 years in regional development. You can't blame that on COVID. That goes back to pre-COVID 2 years ago. A massive, massive cut. Acute health in small rural services that I think the member for Lowen mentioned in her contribution, cut by $11 million. Drug prevention and control and drug treatment and rehab, a $40 million cut. 40 million. Now, yes, we've had a new drug and alcohol rehab centre in recent years opened in East Gippsland, and that is welcome. But this is a problem that's right across the board, right across the length and breadth of Victoria, and we shouldn't have reductions in those very important areas. Community health care, cut $106 million. Dental, $27 million cut. I've had somebody in my office this week who's been into the Bairnsdale Regional Health Service yesterday to get an urgent dental care work job completed, and was told the waiting list was 2 years. Now, how are we going to fix that? And it's longer in other areas of rural and regional Victoria. 3 years here, and we have a cut to the budget. How are we going to fix those long-term waiting lists if we have cuts of $27 million? Home and community care program for younger people, $13 million cut. Sport, recreation and racing, down $340 million on what was spent last year.
Disgraceful.
Community sport, as we're trying to get back together, and we're trying to get going again after COVID, where we've missed that social interaction within our community groups. Clubs are struggling, and we have to put up with that. I guess what encapsulates this whole issue is when we look at the capital spend in rural and regional Victoria as compared to the metro area. Now, the capital expenditure was 13% this year, in this year's budget. It was, surprisingly, that's up. It was 11.4% the year before. But 11% and 13.4%, and rural and regional Victoria has 25% of Victoria's population.
Not a fair
The
share.
per capita fair share, and the member for Euroa just walks into the chamber, who raised this very point in her contribution. In no one's language and no one's interpretation can that breakdown of the capital rural spend be considered fair or equitable.
Not fair share.
It just cannot be. It cannot be. Moving on, Acting Speaker, to a couple of my portfolios. By gee, we had an interesting PAYAC hearing this week that the member for Gippsland South was heavily involved with here. But we have the Office of Disability funding cut by 50%, or $7.5 million. And I think it was actually the member for Gippsland South himself who asked the minister to explain this 50% cut to the Office of Disability, which provides services for advocacy groups in our community and supports those most in need in our community. And after a lot of paper shuffling on the front table and a lot of looking between the minister and the bureaucrats, it was put down as a mistake in the budget papers. A mistake in the budget papers.
I hope that's corrected.
Well, I'm not sure who proofread the budget papers, but they probably should have picked up a 50% cut. What was interesting, though, Acting Speaker, was down in the fine print just below, it had an explanation for the cut.
Oh.
So it had an explanation
So it's justified.
for the mistake. So I'm not sure how that plays out, but we hope that we get a bit more detail when answers are forthcoming. There was a little episode there that almost bordered on comedy, when the Shadow Minister was asked about the 38 new aged care beds at Orbost Regional Health. And the Minister, I correct that, was asked about the 38 new aged care beds in Orbost. And he was asked quite simply, there are 38 beds there now. Is this a refurbishment of the existing 38 beds, or is this 38 new beds? The response he gave was this is 38 new beds in addition. So that means we should have 76 aged care beds in Orbost, Acting Speaker.
That's a high ratio.
That is not the case, I believe. Management at Orbost Regional Health assures me that it is only a refurbishment. Only a refurbishment. Now, I would have thought that the Minister would have been across the very basics of his portfolio to be able to know if it's a refurbishment or 38 new beds. It's pretty simple, Dorothy Dixie. You would have thought, well, I'm going to be asked about that in PAYAC, I better prepare. But it got even better. There's 103 less special residential services beds in Victoria. Now, you would know, Acting Speaker, our special residential services beds are those beds that care for the most needy in our community, whether they be people with mental health issues, whether they be people with disability issues or people with a dual diagnosis or various different problems, but they're very important. And the budget papers clearly show that there's a reduction of 103 beds in Victoria. And I think it was again the member for Gippsland South who asked this question. And we were simply wanting to know whether these beds might have been reallocated or if they had been cut, where they'd been cut. Again, it's there in black and white, standing out like the proverbials, Acting Speaker, in the budget papers. You would think the Minister of the day would say, well, I'm certainly going to be asked about this. But when we asked that simple, basic question, again, a lot of paper shuffling. The three bureaucrats sitting either side of the minister, shuffling through papers, and then said, we don't know.
Ah, what?
We will have to come back to you on those 103 special residential services beds. We do not know. Now, we get into age support services, a cut there of $41 million or 37.8%. Veterans, the veterans budget is down $2 million. The minister was asked to explain the reduction of $2 million in the veterans budget and just disappeared off on another tangent that was totally irrelevant to the question that was asked. So we only hope that we get the answer back on notice, as has been promised that we will receive. But we need to know where that money's gone. And all these cuts I'm talking about come on the back of, I think the member for Euroa mentioning, we are on $28 billion of cost overruns on metro projects. Waste. Imagine what that could do. Imagine what that would do. I'm sure the Minister for Agriculture would love a piece of that back to be able to distribute that amongst the agricultural sector in rural and regional Victoria. 28 billion. Not million, billion. Just incredible. In my electorate, if I can spend a few moments on that, the roads asset management budget cut, which I mentioned earlier, is that stuff is critical to the areas of the regions. Outside the provincial centres, you know, we have Lowen in the far west of the state, East Gippsland in the far east, we obviously in the far east, South Gippsland, the National Party seats, Ovens Valley, okay, Murray Plains, Euroa. Our roads are a disgrace. And we were hoping to pick up the budget papers and see significant investment to fix those roads problems. And what do? We pick up the budget papers and we see another cut this year to road asset management and transport infrastructure. On a local issue, we've got the Orbost Police Station. When Mallacoota Police Station was funded 4 years ago, I had local police inspector and superintendent driving along in a car, rang me and said, what the hell are we funding Mallacoota for? Orbost at the top of the list by a long way. They're having trouble recruiting police to Orbost because the facilities there are so downgraded. Another budget passes and nothing for them. With the Minister's support, permission, I attended the Maffra Police Station about 4 weeks ago. Desperate need of an upgrade. Absolutely desperate need of an upgrade. They literally have not got room to cater for the staff in that growing little country community. The plans have been there for several years now. They missed out. Meetung Fire Brigade, a great little fire brigade. They bought their own land. They're ready to go. They're shovel ready. They just need the money in the budget to build their fire station. Another growing community that needs a modern facility. Nothing. Lakes Entrance Fire Brigade. They've got the land put aside on Palmers Road for their new station. They're ready to go. Nothing. We wanted some of these very important emergency services facilities knocked off in this budget. Not unreasonable, don't expect to get them all, but at least give us one or two.
Fair share.
But we had nothing, no fair share. The irony is that some of the budget funds that we had distributed, the people who were receiving them knew nothing about it. The 38 beds I mentioned earlier at Orbost Regional Health, I had Orbost Regional Health Management on the phone asking me, what's all this about? Yeah, they're very welcoming of getting the money. The East Gippsland Special School got money coming that they didn't know was coming. Absolutely didn't know. They didn't know that was coming. No communication whatsoever. I just want to finish off by talking about the contribution from the Greens member in relation to the timber industry, saying that it was wrong that money had been allocated in the budget. When I sat down with him to discuss this, he had absolutely nothing, and I'll conclude my contribution with those remarks.